The crystalline spires of Zephyria Prime stretched toward twin suns, their surfaces reflecting the morning light in patterns that would have mesmerized any human eye. But Marcus Chun kept his gaze fixed straight ahead, his dark uniform pristine despite the early hour. The human embassy guard post wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and after 3 years of service, he'd grown comfortable with the routine. Queen Valeth Korthak descended the grand staircase of her palace, her chitinous exoskeleton gleaming like polished obsidian. Each step echoed with authority that had been bred into her species for millennia. The Zephyrians were a proud race, their civilization spanning over 2,000 years, and she was their most accomplished ruler in generations. Her 4 arms moved with practiced grace, 2 holding ceremonial staffs, while the other pair gestured as she spoke to her advisors. Marcus had seen her before, of course. The embassy was positioned strategically to overlook the palace plaza, and royal processions were common. But today felt different. Today, she was coming to the embassy for the quarterly diplomatic review, something that had never happened in his tenure. "Chun," barked Sergeant Morrison, his voice cutting through the morning air. "You're on honor guard detail. Queen's arriving in 20 minutes. Look sharp." Marcus straightened his already perfect posture and checked his ceremonial rifle one final time. His hands were steady, but something fluttered in his chest when he thought about standing at attention while the most powerful being on the planet walked past him. Not fear exactly. Marcus had faced down pirates in the outer colonies and stood firm during 3 different rebellions. This was something else entirely. The Queen's retinue arrived precisely on schedule. Marcus watched from his peripheral vision as hover platforms descended, carrying nobles whose names he couldn't pronounce and whose political machinations he didn't understand. But when Queen Valeth emerged from the lead platform, everything else seemed to fade into background noise. She was magnificent in a way that transcended species. Her height commanded attention, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with an elegant neck that curved gracefully. Her large, multifaceted eyes caught the light as they swept across the embassy entrance, taking in every detail with the calculating gaze of someone who had survived court intrigues in childhood. Marcus kept his eyes forward, but he could feel her presence like gravity as she approached. The diplomatic protocols required him to remain at attention until she passed, then fall in behind the escort. Simple enough. He'd done 100 times with other dignitaries. "Your human guards are quite disciplined," Queen Valeth remarked to Ambassador Harrison, her voice carrying a melodic quality that the universal translator couldn't quite capture. "This one in particular seems very focused." Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks, but maintained his composure. She was talking about him. The Queen of Zephyria Prime was talking about him. "Guard Chun has an exemplary record, Your Majesty," Ambassador Harrison replied smoothly. 3 years of distinguished service. "Chun." She repeated his name slowly, as if testing how it felt. "A human name?" "Yes, Your Majesty." "Earthborn, though he served in the outer colonies for most of his career." The conversation moved on, but Marcus caught something in the Queen's tone that he couldn't identify. Interest? Curiosity? He told himself he was imagining things. Queens didn't take interest in embassy guards, especially not shy ones who could barely manage small talk with their own species, let alone alien royalty. The meeting lasted 4 hours. Marcus remained at his post, professional and alert, but his mind wandered more than usual. He found himself thinking about the way the Queen had said his name, the slight pause before she'd moved on. When the retinue finally departed, he watched the hover platforms disappear over the palace walls and tried to convince himself that was the end of it. 3 days later, a messenger arrived at the embassy, not through official channels, but a small, nervous Zephyrian servant who approached Marcus directly during his afternoon patrol. "Guard Chun," the servant asked in broken standard. "Message for you. From Palace." Marcus accepted the sealed document with confusion and growing concern. Personal messages from the palace weren't standard protocol. He waited until his shift ended before opening it in the privacy of his quarters. The message was brief and written in elegant script. "Your dedication to duty has been noted. Should you wish to learn more about Zephyrian culture, private tours of the palace archives can be arranged. No obligation expected. VK." Marcus read it 3 times, his heart rate increasing with each pass. This was impossible. Queens didn't send personal invitations to guards. There had to be some mistake, some protocol he didn't understand. But the signature was genuine, bearing the royal seal that was impossible to forge. He spent the next 2 days analyzing every possible angle. Was this a test? A trap? Some kind of diplomatic gambit he wasn't sophisticated enough to understand? Marcus had always been more comfortable with clear orders and straightforward situations. This felt like stepping into a maze blindfolded. On the third day, he made his decision. Whatever this was, running away wouldn't provide answers. He composed a careful response accepting the invitation and sent it through the same messenger who had waited patiently outside the embassy gates. The palace archives were unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Crystalline storage units rose 30 feet to vaulted ceilings, containing the recorded history of an entire civilization. Queen Valeth met him at the entrance personally, having dismissed her usual retinue of guards and advisors. "I wasn't certain you would come," she said, her large eyes reflecting the soft luminescence of the archive lighting. "Humans have a reputation for caution when dealing with situations they don't understand." "I've never been accused of being overly cautious, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, surprised by his own boldness. "Please, call me Valeth when we're alone. Titles become tiresome when they're not necessary." She led him through corridors lined with historical artifacts, explaining the significance of various pieces with genuine enthusiasm. Marcus found himself relaxing despite the surreal nature of the situation. Valeth was knowledgeable and engaging, with a dry sense of humor that translated well across species lines. "This particular sculpture," she said, stopping before a twisted metal form that seemed to capture movement frozen in time, "represents the moment our people first achieved faster-than-light travel. The artist was actually aboard that first ship. She created this from memory 50 years later." "It's beautiful," Marcus said, meaning it. "Must have been incredible to be there for something so historic. I imagine it was similar to what your species felt when they first left Earth. That moment when the universe suddenly became larger and full of possibilities." They continued through the archives, discussing art and history with an ease that Marcus hadn't expected. Valeth asked thoughtful questions about human culture, showing genuine interest in perspectives that differed from her own. As the hours passed, he began to forget about the vast differences in their backgrounds and simply enjoy the conversation. "May I ask you something personal?" Valeth said as they paused before a viewing alcove overlooking the palace gardens. Marcus nodded, though his stomach tightened with anticipation. "Why did you choose to serve as a guard?" "Your service record suggests you're qualified for much more advanced positions. Command track, perhaps, or specialized operations." The question caught him off guard. He'd expected inquiries about human customs or diplomatic matters, not personal career choices. "I like knowing what's expected of me," he said after a moment. "Guard duty is straightforward. Protect the embassy, maintain security, follow orders. I've never been comfortable with the politics and maneuvering that comes with higher positions." That's refreshingly honest. "Most people in my presence try to impress me with their ambitions and accomplishments. I don't have many accomplishments worth bragging about. Your Maj, Valeth." She turned to study his profile, her expression unreadable. "I think you underestimate yourself, Marcus Chun. It takes considerable character to find satisfaction in duty itself, rather than the recognition it might bring." Their eyes met, and Marcus felt that flutter in his chest again, stronger this time. There was something in her gaze that made him feel seen in a way he'd never experienced before. Not judged or evaluated, but simply understood. "I should probably head back," he said reluctantly. "Don't want to overstay my welcome." "Of course. But Marcus?" She placed one of her 4 hands gently on his shoulder, the chitinous surface warm and surprisingly soft. "You're welcome here anytime. I find your perspective refreshing." The walk back to the embassy felt like floating. Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, though he couldn't define exactly what. A friendship? That seemed presumptuous. Alien queens didn't typically befriend human guards. But whatever it was, he found himself hoping it would continue. Over the following weeks, the private tours became a regular occurrence. Sometimes they explored different sections of the archives. Other times they walked through the palace gardens, discussing philosophy and literature. Valeth introduced him to Zephyrian poetry, which relied more on harmonic combinations than verbal imagery, while Marcus shared stories from human colonies that made her laugh with genuine delight. The conversations grew more personal as trust developed between them. Valeth spoke about the isolation of leadership, the weight of decisions that affected millions of lives, the difficulty of finding people who saw beyond her title to the person underneath. Marcus talked about growing up on Earth's moon colonies, about choosing a quiet life over the chaos and ambition that drove most of his peers, about finding peace in routine when the universe often felt overwhelming. You know, Valeth said during one evening walk, I've been thinking about what you said regarding the politics of advancement. But isn't it possible that avoiding leadership means avoiding the chance to make things better? Maybe, Marcus admitted, but it also means avoiding the chance to make things worse. I've seen what happens when the wrong person gets power. Sometimes the best thing you can do is stay in your lane and do your job well. But what if your lane could be bigger? What if you could do more good from a position of greater responsibility? It was a conversation that continued over several meetings, each probing deeper into questions of purpose and potential. Marcus found himself considering possibilities he'd dismissed years earlier, not because Valeth was pushing him toward ambition, but because her perspective helped him see his own capabilities more clearly. The turning point came during a late-night emergency. Pirates had attacked a civilian transport in the outer system, and the embassy was coordinating rescue efforts with Zephyrian forces. Marcus was working communications when Queen Valeth arrived personally to monitor the situation. "What's our status?" she asked, moving directly to the command station. 3 ships disabled, approximately 200 civilians in immediate danger, Marcus reported without thinking. Zephyrian patrol ships are 40 minutes out, but the pirates have heavy weapons. By the time help arrives, he caught himself mid-sentence, realizing he was briefing a queen as if she were just another officer. But Valeth nodded approvingly. "Options. The embassy has 2 light patrol craft. We could reach them in 20 minutes, but we'd be outgunned. It would be a delaying action at best. Could you make it work?" Marcus analyzed the tactical situation quickly. With the right approach, maybe hit-and-run strikes to keep the pirates busy until the cavalry arrives. High risk, but feasible. "Do it, Your Majesty. I don't have authority, so I'm giving you authority. Those are my people out there, Guardshin. If you think you can help them, then help them." The mission was successful, though barely. Marcus led a 3-ship strike that harassed the pirates long enough for Zephyrian reinforcements to arrive and complete the rescue. All civilians survived, and the pirates were captured or driven off with minimal losses. When Marcus returned to the embassy, exhausted and running on adrenaline, he found Valeth waiting for him in the briefing room. "That was impressive tactical thinking," she said, "and exceptional leadership under pressure. Just doing my job, Your Majesty." "No, Marcus. That was doing much more than your job. That was recognizing when the situation demanded more than following orders and having the courage to step up." She paused, studying his face. "I have a proposition for you." Marcus felt his world shift slightly off its axis. "Your Majesty, I need a new security advisor. Someone who understands tactics and logistics, but more importantly, someone I can trust to give me honest counsel regardless of the political implications. The position would require you to leave the embassy's service and join my personal staff." The offer hit him like a physical blow. Everything he'd built, the comfortable routine he'd created, the safe boundaries of his current life, would disappear. But as he looked into Valeth's eyes, he saw something that made the fear worth facing. "May I ask why me, Your Majesty?" "You have access to the best military minds in the galaxy. Because you see clearly without ambition clouding your judgment. Because you make decisions based on what's right rather than what advances your career. And because..." She hesitated, then continued with visible determination. "Because I've come to value your perspective on more than just military matters." Marcus felt the weight of the moment settling around them. This wasn't just a job offer. This was an invitation into a completely different life, one that would place him at the center of forces he'd spent years avoiding. But it was also an opportunity to work alongside someone who had become important to him in ways he was only beginning to understand. "When would you need an answer?" "Take whatever time you need. But Marcus, I hope you'll choose to accept. I think we could accomplish remarkable things together." That night, Marcus stood on his quarters balcony, looking out over the palace spires and wrestling with the biggest decision of his life. Everything logical told him to decline politely and maintain the safe, predictable existence he'd built. But something deeper, something that had been growing during those long conversations and shared moments in the archives, whispered that maybe it was time to stop running from possibility. He thought about the way Valeth had trusted him during the rescue operation, The confidence in her voice was she'd given him authority to act. More than that, he thought about the genuine connection they developed, the ease with which they'd moved from formal politeness to something approaching real friendship. For the first time in years, Marcus Chun began to imagine a future that wasn't defined by simply maintaining the status quo. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, but as he watched the twin moons rise over the palace walls, he realized his decision was already made. Marcus stood before the ornate doors of Queen Vailith's private office, his new uniform feeling foreign despite 3 fittings. The ceremonial armor bore the royal crest, marking him as a member of the Queen's personal staff. After 2 weeks of intensive briefings on Zephyrian politics, military structure, and court protocol, he was finally beginning his first day as security advisor to the crown. The transition from embassy guard to royal advisor had been surreal. Ambassador Harrison had been surprisingly supportive, though Marcus suspected the man was relieved to have a direct line of communication with the palace. The other embassy staff had reacted with a mixture of congratulations and bewilderment. Nobody could quite understand how the quiet guard had caught the attention of alien royalty. "Enter," came Vailith's voice from within. Marcus stepped into the spacious office, taking in the wall of windows that provided a panoramic view of the capital city. Vailith stood with her back to him, studying reports displayed on translucent screens that hovered in the air around her workspace. "Your Majesty," Marcus said formally, still adjusting to the protocols of his new position. "When we're alone, please continue calling me Vailith," she replied without turning. The formality becomes exhausting after 12 hours of court sessions. She gestured to the displays. "I'm reviewing intelligence reports about increased pirate activity along the trade routes. Since your successful intervention last month, they've been regrouping and adapting their tactics." Marcus approached the displays, his military training automatically analyzing the data patterns. "They're targeting smaller, less defended convoys now. Multiple simultaneous attacks to stretch our response capabilities thin." "Precisely." Vailith finally turned to face him, and Marcus was struck again by the intelligence in her multifaceted eyes. "My previous security advisor would have recommended increasing patrol frequency along all major routes. Standard military thinking. That would spread our forces too thin. The pirates would adapt again, and we'd be playing catch-up indefinitely." Marcus studied the attack patterns more closely. "What if we let them think their new strategy is working?" Vailith's head tilted slightly. A gesture he'd learned indicated intense interest. "Elaborate. False intelligence. Make them believe we're reducing security along certain routes while actually setting up coordinated response teams. When they take the bait and launch their next wave of attacks, we hit them all simultaneously." "You're suggesting we use civilian convoys as bait?" "No," Marcus said quickly. "We use empty convoys with hidden escort ships. The pirates get what looks like easy targets, but they're actually walking into prepared ambushes." Vailith moved closer to study his face, and Marcus caught the subtle scent that was uniquely hers, something like ozone mixed with exotic flowers. "This plan requires precise coordination and significant resources. If it fails, the political consequences would be severe. If it succeeds, we eliminate the pirate threat for the foreseeable future and establish a deterrent against future raiders." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "High risk, high reward. And what if I'm not willing to accept that level of risk?" The question felt like a test, and Marcus considered his response carefully. 3 weeks ago, he would have automatically deferred to superior judgment. Now, after countless hours discussing strategy and philosophy with Vailith, he understood that she valued honest analysis over diplomatic agreement. "Then, we continue the current approach and accept that pirate raids are cost of doing business. It's safer politically, but it means more civilian casualties over time and increased economic damage to trade networks." Vailith was quiet for a long moment, her large eyes studying the tactical displays. "You know, my previous advisor would never have presented a plan this aggressive. He believed in minimizing political risk above all else. What happened to him? He resigned after I started questioning his recommendations too frequently. Claimed I was becoming impossible to advise." Her voice carried a hint of amusement. "Perhaps he was right. I find myself less willing to accept conventional wisdom, simply because it's conventional." Marcus felt a flush of pride at the implied compliment. We're dealing with unconventional problems. Conventional solutions rarely work. Indeed. Very well, Marcus. Develop this plan in detail. I want comprehensive timelines, resource requirements, and contingency protocols. If you can make it work on paper, I'll consider implementing it. Yes, Your Majesty. Valeth, she corrected with a slight smile. And Marcus? Good work. I had hoped you would bring fresh perspective to this position. You're exceeding expectations. The praise hit him harder than any military commendation he'd ever received. Coming from someone whose intelligence and judgment he'd grown to respect deeply, it felt like validation of possibilities he'd never allowed himself to imagine. Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into developing the anti-piracy operation with an intensity that surprised him. He found himself working late into the evening, refining tactical approaches, and coordinating with Zephyrian military commanders who initially viewed the human advisor with skepticism. That skepticism began to fade as the plan took shape. Marcus's experience in the outer colonies provided insights into pirate psychology and tactics that most Zephyrian officers lacked. His approach combined human adaptability with Zephyrian technological advantages in ways that neither species had considered independently. You've been working late again, Valeth observed one evening as she found him in the strategy room, surrounded by holographic fleet positions and supply line analyses. Marcus looked up, realizing with surprise that the palace had grown quiet around him. The coordination timing is critical. If any element is delayed by more than 30 minutes, the entire operation could collapse. And you believe micromanaging every detail will prevent that. I believe understanding every detail increases the chances of success. Valeth moved to stand beside him, studying the tactical display with practiced eyes. Tell me, what happens if something goes wrong anyway? Despite all your planning and preparation? We adapt, improvise, make the best decisions possible with available information. Exactly. So why are you trying to plan for every possible contingency instead of trusting in your ability to handle unexpected situations? Marcus paused, recognizing the gentle challenge in her words. Because if this fails, it reflects poorly on your judgment. You took a risk by promoting me to this position. I don't want to let you down. Valeth's expression softened, and she placed one of her hands on his shoulder. The gesture had become familiar over the past weeks, but it still sent a warm sensation through his chest. Marcus, I didn't choose you because I thought you were infallible. I chose you because you make good decisions under pressure and because you're willing to take calculated risks when the situation demands it. But you can't succeed if you're paralyzed by fear of failure. It's not fear of failure that's driving me, Marcus said quietly. It's fear of disappointing you. The admission hung in the air between them, more personal than anything he'd intended to share. Valeth's large eyes searched his face, and Marcus felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with professional vulnerability. You could never disappoint me, she said softly. Your dedication and integrity are exactly what I hoped for when I offered you this position. But, Marcus, you need to trust yourself the way I trust you. Something shifted in that moment, a deepening of connection that transcended their professional relationship. Marcus found himself studying the elegant curves of her features, the way the soft lighting played across her chitinous skin, the intelligence and warmth in her expression. I'm not used to this, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Having someone believe in me more than I believe in myself. Perhaps it's time to start learning. Their faces were closer now, and Marcus could feel the warmth radiating from her body. The rational part of his mind noted the impossibility of the situation, the vast differences between their species, their positions, their entire worlds. But a stronger part, one that had been growing since their first conversation in the archives, didn't care about any of that. Valeth, he began, but she placed a gentle finger against his lips. I know what you're thinking. The complications, the protocols, the potential consequences. Her voice was soft but steady. I've thought about all of those things too. But I've also thought about how much I've come to value our time together, how you've helped me see possibilities I hadn't considered, how you've become someone I genuinely care about. Marcus felt his heart racing as the implications of her words sank in. Are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes the most important decisions aren't the ones we make with our heads. And sometimes the greatest risks lead to the greatest rewards. She leaned closer, and Marcus found himself responding instinctively. Their first kiss was gentle tentative, an exploration of possibilities rather than a declaration of certainty. But it carried the weight of everything they'd built together over the past months, every shared conversation and moment of understanding. When they separated, Marcus felt as though the universe had shifted around him. Everything familiar had taken on new dimensions, new significance. "This changes everything," he said. "Yes," Valeth agreed, her voice carrying both certainty and vulnerability. "Are you willing to accept that?" Marcus looked into her eyes and saw his own hopes and fears reflected there. The careful, predictable life he'd built for himself was officially over, replaced by something infinitely more complex and infinitely more meaningful. "Yes," he said simply. The anti-piracy operation launched 3 days later with precision that impressed even the most skeptical military commanders. Marcus coordinated from the Palace Command Center, while Valeth monitored progress from the Royal Observation Deck. The fake convoys performed exactly as planned, drawing pirate forces into carefully prepared ambushes across 6 different sectors simultaneously. "All targets engaged," reported Fleet Commander Zefak, his voice crackling through the communications array. "Pirates are taking heavy casualties and retreating from all sectors." Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction as reports flooded in. The operation was succeeding beyond even optimistic projections. Pirate forces that had plagued trade routes for months were being systematically eliminated or captured, their leadership structure shattered by the coordinated assault. "Outstanding work, Marcus," Valeth said, joining him at the command station. In public, she maintained perfect professional demeanor, but Marcus caught the warmth in her voice that others would miss. "The planning phase was the difficult part," he replied modestly. "The execution belongs to your military commanders. False modesty doesn't suit you. This was your concept, your coordination, your success." Over the following hours, the magnitude of their victory became clear. Pirate activity along the major trade routes dropped to negligible levels virtually overnight. Economic analysts projected significant increases in commercial traffic and reduced insurance costs for civilian shipping. Most importantly, no civilian casualties had been sustained during the operation. As reports came in from across the sector, Marcus found himself surrounded by congratulatory messages from military officers who had initially questioned his qualifications. The human advisor who had seemed like a political appointment was now being hailed as a tactical genius. "You realize this changes your position here significantly," Valeth mentioned during a quiet moment between briefings. "Success of this magnitude draws attention. There will be people who want to understand how it happened and who is responsible. Is that a problem?" "It could be. Some members of the nobility have been questioning my recent decisions, including your appointment. They'll view this success as either validation of my judgment or evidence that I'm relying too heavily on outside influences." Marcus felt a chill as the political implications became clear. His success might actually create problems for Valeth if her opponents decided to use it against her. "What do you need me to do?" "Continue being exactly who you are. Make good decisions, provide honest counsel, and don't let political pressures change your approach." She paused, looking around to ensure they weren't being overheard. "And remember that whatever challenges we face them together now." The personal promise beneath her words steadied him. Whatever complications arose from their professional or personal relationship, they would navigate them as a team. That evening, as the palace settled into its nighttime routine, Marcus stood again on the observation deck, where he'd first truly connected with Valeth. The view was the same, but his perspective had transformed completely. 6 months ago, he'd been a guard content with routine and predictability. Now he was a strategic advisor whose decisions affected millions of lives, personally involved with a queen whose intelligence and strength challenged him to be better than he'd ever imagined possible. The risks were enormous. Political opposition, cultural barriers, the simple logistics of maintaining a relationship between beings from different worlds. But as Valeth joined him on the deck, slipping her hand into his with practiced discretion, Marcus realized that some possibilities were worth any amount of uncertainty. "Regrets?" she asked quietly. Marcus looked out over the city lights, thinking about the path that had led him to this moment. About leaving the embassy? About accepting your offer? About everything that's happened since? About any of it? "No," he said with complete certainty. "No regrets." Valeth squeezed his hand gently, and they stood together in comfortable silence, two beings from different worlds who had found something extraordinary in the space between their differences. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications, new tests of everything they were building together. But tonight, under the light of Zephyria Prime's twin moons, Marcus Chun felt truly at home for the first time in his life. The first sign of trouble came during the monthly Council of Nobles session, 3 weeks after the anti-piracy operation's resounding success. Marcus monitored the proceedings from the security station, watching through discreet cameras as Zephyrian aristocrats debated policy with the passionate intensity that had characterized their species for millennia. "The question before us," declared Lord Vorthack, his voice carrying the authority of ancient bloodlines, "is whether our sovereign has been unduly influenced by foreign advisors in recent strategic decisions." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He'd expected political pushback eventually, but hearing himself referred to as a foreign influence still stung. Through the camera feed, he watched Valeth maintain perfect composure at the head of the council chamber, her 4 arms positioned in a gesture of patient attention. "Lord Vorthack raises an interesting point," replied Lady Thessera, one of Valeth's longtime supporters. "Should we ignore successful operations simply because they originated with non-Zephyrian strategic thinking? Success in one operation does not validate abandoning traditional military doctrine," Vorthack countered. "Our people have defended this realm for 2 millennia using proven methods developed by our own commanders." Marcus watched Valeth's expression remain neutral, but he learned to read the subtle signs of her growing irritation. The slight adjustment of her posture, the barely perceptible tightening around her eyes. She was allowing the debate to continue, but her patience had limits. "Perhaps," interjected Duke Kerrigan, a moderate voice in the council, "we should hear from the security advisor himself. After all, we're discussing his contributions to our defense strategy." The suggestion sent murmurs rippling through the chamber. Direct testimony from a non-Zephyrian in the Council of Nobles was unprecedented. Marcus felt every eye in the room turned toward the security station, though they couldn't see him through the one-way viewing panel. "An excellent suggestion," Valeth said, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Marcus Chun, please join us." Marcus straightened his formal uniform and entered the council chamber, acutely aware that he was making history simply by walking through those doors. The assembled nobility represented the oldest and most powerful families on Zephyria Prime, beings whose influence stretched back to the founding of their civilization. "Honored Council," Marcus began, using the formal address Valeth had taught him, "I am honored by this opportunity to address your concerns." "Advisor Chun," Lord Vorthack said, his tone carefully neutral, "your recent strategic recommendations have indeed proven effective. However, some of us question whether relying on human tactical concepts represents a concerning departure from Zephyrian military tradition. With respect, Lord Vorthack, I believe the most important military tradition is protecting your people effectively. The pirates weren't following traditional rules when they adapted their strategies. Responding to new threats sometimes requires new approaches. But at what cost to our identity as a people?" pressed Duchess Zephine, another conservative voice. "If we begin adopting foreign methods wholesale, what separates us from any other species in the galaxy?" The question struck deeper than Marcus had expected. He could see the genuine concern in the Duchess's expression, the fear that embracing outside perspectives might somehow diminish what made Zephyrian civilization unique. "Your Majesty," Marcus said, turning to address Valeth directly, "perhaps you could speak to this better than I can. You've seen how collaboration can enhance rather than replace existing strengths." Valeth rose gracefully, her presence commanding immediate attention from every member of the council. "Duchess Zephine raises an important point about identity and tradition. But I would argue that our greatest tradition has always been wisdom and governance. When we encounter new challenges, wisdom demands that we consider all available solutions, regardless of their origin. But surely," Lord Vorthack interjected, "wisdom also demands caution about foreign influence over critical decisions." "It does," Valeth agreed calmly, "which is why I spent months evaluating Advisor Chen's judgment and capabilities before placing him in a position of responsibility. His recommendations undergo the same scrutiny as any other strategic proposal. The difference is that his perspective allows us to see problems from angles we might otherwise miss." Marcus felt a surge of gratitude for her support, but also growing awareness of the political tightrope she was walking. Every defense of his position potentially cost her political capital with traditionalist factions. The debate continued for another hour, with various nobles raising concerns about precedent, security risks, and the message being sent to other species about Zephyrian sovereignty. Marcus answered each question as thoroughly as possible, but he could sense that many council members had made up their minds before he'd entered the chamber. "I believe we've heard sufficient testimony," Valeth said finally. "Unless there are formal motions to be presented, I suggest we move to the next item of business." As the council session concluded, Marcus caught meaningful glances exchanged between several conservative members. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't over. "That went better than I expected," Valeth said later as they walked through the palace gardens, away from potential listening devices and political observers. "Did it? Because from where I was standing, it felt like I was on trial." "In a sense, you were. But you handled yourself well. Professional, respectful, but not intimidated." She paused beside a fountain that threw crystalline water in complex patterns toward the evening sky. "Unfortunately, I suspect that was only the opening move." "What do you mean?" "Lord Vorthak has been building a coalition of traditionalist nobles for months. They see recent changes in my administration as evidence that I'm abandoning Zephyrian values in favor of progressive experiments." Valeth's expression grew troubled. "Your appointment, successful though it's been, provides them with a concrete example to rally around." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Are you saying my being here is causing problems for you politically?" "I'm saying that change always creates resistance, especially when it challenges established power structures. The question is whether we allow that resistance to dictate our decisions. And if the council decides I'm too much of a liability..." Valeth stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "Then they'll discover that I don't make personnel decisions based on political convenience. You're here because you've earned your position through competence and dedication. That doesn't change because some nobles are uncomfortable with innovation." The conviction in her voice was reassuring, but Marcus couldn't shake his growing concern about the position he was putting her in. "Valeth, I need you to understand something. If keeping me here costs you too much political support, if it weakens your ability to govern effectively, then we need to consider alternatives. Such as, I could request a transfer to a less visible position, remain available as a consultant, but step back from day-to-day advisory responsibilities." Valeth's expression hardened, her multifaceted eyes flashing with something between anger and hurt. "Is that what you want? To retreat the moment things become complicated?" "No," Marcus said quickly. "What I want is for you to succeed as a leader. If my presence here makes that more difficult..." "Marcus!" She moved closer, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "Do you trust my judgment?" "Completely." "Then trust that I know what's best for my reign and my people. Retreating from good decisions because they're politically challenging sets a dangerous precedent. If I compromise on this, what happens when they challenge the next progressive policy?" Marcus nodded, understanding the larger principle at stake. This wasn't just about his position, but about Valeth's authority as a sovereign and her vision for Zephyria's future. "All right," he said, "but we need to be prepared for whatever they're planning next." "Already working on it." Duke Kerrigan has been monitoring conservative faction meetings. They're planning to propose a formal motion of no confidence in my choice of advisors. "Can they do that?" "Technically, yes. The council has the authority to question any royal appointment. If they can demonstrate that an advisor poses a threat to planetary security or has acted against Zephyrian interests, they can demand removal. And if you refuse, then we discover how much support I actually have among the nobility." The implications were sobering. Marcus had studied enough Zephyrian political history to understand that previous monarchs had been forced to abdicate when they lost the confidence of the noble council. Valeth's position, for all its apparent strength, ultimately depended on maintaining sufficient aristocratic support. "What can I do to help?" "Continue doing your job exceptionally well. Give them no legitimate grounds for criticism." And she hesitated, then continued with visible determination. "Be prepared for them to investigate our personal relationship." Marcus felt his blood run cold. He'd been careful to maintain professional decorum in public, but determined investigators could probably find evidence of their growing closeness. "How much do they know?" "Nothing concrete yet, but Lord Vorthak is thorough when he's building a case. Staff interviews, surveillance of private meetings, analysis of communication patterns. If he suspects there's something to find, he'll find it. And if he does, then we'll face that challenge when it comes. But, Marcus, I want you to understand something clearly. Whatever happens, I don't regret any of the choices we've made. Not professionally, and not personally. Her words provided comfort, but also highlighted the magnitude of what they were facing. Their relationship wasn't just a private matter anymore. It was potentially a political weapon that could be used against them both. Over the following weeks, the tension in the palace became palpable. Conservative nobles made frequent visits to review security protocols and administrative procedures. Staff members reported unusual questions about Marcus's activities and access to sensitive information. The investigation was proceeding with careful discretion, but its existence was impossible to hide. Marcus threw himself into his work with renewed intensity, determined to make his professional performance unassailable. He developed 3 new security protocols, restructured the palace guard rotations for maximum efficiency, and produced detailed threat assessments for every major diplomatic initiative. If the council was looking for evidence of incompetence or disloyalty, they wouldn't find it. But professional excellence couldn't address the more personal aspects of their investigation. Marcus and Valith began limiting their private meetings, communicating primarily through official channels, and maintaining strict formality during public interactions. The distance was painful for both of them, but necessary to avoid providing ammunition for their opponents. This is exactly what they wanted, Valith said during one of their rare private moments, stolen during a late-night security briefing. They're forcing us to behave as if we have something to hide. Don't we? Marcus replied quietly. We have something worth protecting. That's different from hiding wrongdoing. Is it, though? From their perspective, the Queen of Zephyria developing personal feelings for an alien advisor probably looks like compromised judgment at best. Valith was quiet for a long moment, studying the security reports spread across her desk. Do you think my judgment has been compromised? The question carried weight beyond its simple phrasing. Marcus understood that she wasn't just asking about their relationship, but about his entire role in her administration. I think you've made decisions based on what you believed was best for your people. Whether those decisions were influenced by personal feelings, I honestly don't know. I can't separate my professional respect for you from my personal feelings anymore. Neither can I, she admitted, which is exactly what worries me. Are you having second thoughts? About us? No. About whether I've been as objective as a ruler should be. Yes. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe Lord Vorthak has a point. Maybe I have let personal considerations influence state decisions. Maybe the responsible thing to do is step back and evaluate everything objectively. And how do you propose to do that? By accepting their motion for a formal review. Let them present their evidence and make their case. If they can demonstrate that my judgment has been compromised, then perhaps change is necessary. Marcus stared at her, trying to process the implications of what she was suggesting. You're going to voluntarily submit to their investigation. I'm going to demonstrate confidence in my decisions by allowing them to be examined openly. If my choices have been sound, the review will vindicate them. If not, she shrugged with forced casualness. And if they decide that removing me is necessary for your political survival, then we'll deal with that possibility when it becomes reality. But, Marcus, I won't govern from a position of defensive fear. Either my decisions have been correct or they haven't. Either my judgment is sound or it isn't. Running from scrutiny won't change those fundamental questions. Marcus recognized the wisdom in her approach, even as it terrified him. Valith was choosing to face their challenges directly rather than allowing them to fester in shadows and speculation. It was exactly the kind of decisive leadership that had attracted him to her in the first place. When does the review begin? Next week. Lord Vorthak will present his case before the full council. I'll have the opportunity to respond, and you'll be able to defend your own actions and recommendations. Are you confident we can survive this? Valith moved closer, taking his hands in her own. For a moment, the political calculations and strategic concerns faded, leaving only the connection that had grown between them. I'm confident that we've done nothing we need to be ashamed of, she said softly. Whatever happens, we'll face it with integrity. As Marcus looked in her eyes, he realized that their greatest test wasn't going to be political maneuvering or council proceedings. It was going to be maintaining their connection and their individual principles while the foundations of their world shifted around them. The Shy Guard and the Proud Queen had found something extraordinary together, but keeping it might require more courage than either of them had ever needed before. The Council of Nobles had never hosted such a contentious session in living memory. Marcus sat in the witness section, watching as Lord Vorthak presented his case with the methodical precision of someone who had spent months preparing for this moment. The evidence was circumstantial, but damning in its accumulation. Private meetings outside normal protocols, unprecedented access to classified information, strategic decisions that departed dramatically from established doctrine. Your Majesty, Vorthak addressed Valeth formally. These patterns suggest a concerning level of influence over critical state decisions by someone whose loyalty ultimately lies with humanity, not Zephyria Prime. Valeth maintained perfect composure from her position at the head of the council chamber. Lord Vorthak, are you suggesting that Advisor Chun has acted against Zephyrian interests? I'm suggesting that the nature of his influence over your Majesty's decisions requires scrutiny. The anti-piracy operation, while successful, represented a significant departure from traditional military doctrine. The question is whether such departures serve our interests or advance a foreign agenda. Marcus felt the weight of every gaze in the chamber. The assembled nobility represented centuries of Zephyrian tradition and power, and most of them were hearing detailed arguments about his alleged influence for the first time. Duke Kerrigan, ever the moderate voice, raised a careful objection. Lord Vorthak, the anti-piracy operation's success is undeniable. Civilian casualties are down 80%, trade revenue has increased significantly, and pirate activity has virtually ceased. Are you arguing we should reject effective strategies based solely on their origin? I'm arguing that we should examine why our sovereign has chosen to embrace such strategies and whether personal considerations may have influenced her judgment. The implication hung in the air like a blade. Vorthak hadn't directly accused Valeth of romantic involvement with Marcus, but the suggestion was clear enough for everyone to understand. Perhaps, Valeth said, her voice carrying a dangerous edge, Lord Vorthak would like to be more explicit about these alleged personal considerations. Marcus held his breath. This was the moment they both dreaded, when speculation would either be proven or dismissed. Your Majesty, I have no desire to intrude upon your privacy. However, multiple palace staff have reported unusual patterns of interaction between you and Advisor Chun. Extended private meetings, informal communications outside official channels, and a level of personal familiarity that exceeds normal advisor relationships. And what exactly do you conclude from these observations? Vorthak paused, clearly uncomfortable with the direct challenge. I conclude that your Majesty's judgment may have been compromised by factors beyond professional consideration. The accusation fell into absolute silence. Marcus could hear his own heartbeat as he waited for Valeth's response. Lord Vorthak, Valeth said finally, rising from her chair with deliberate grace, you're absolutely correct. Shocked murmurs rippled through the chamber. Marcus felt the floor drop out from under him. This wasn't the defense strategy they discussed. My judgment has indeed been influenced by factors beyond professional consideration, Valeth continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. I have been influenced by Advisor Chen's integrity, his dedication to protecting innocent lives, his willingness to challenge conventional thinking when situations demand innovation. I have been influenced by his refusal to seek personal advancement and his commitment to honest counsel regardless of political consequences. She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. And, yes, Lord Vorthak, I have also been influenced by my growing personal respect and affection for someone who has consistently demonstrated the qualities I most value in both advisors and individuals. The chamber erupted in shocked conversation. Marcus stared at Valeth in disbelief. She had just confirmed their personal relationship before the entire noble council. Your Majesty, Lady Thessera interjected, are you confirming a romantic relationship with Advisor Chun? I am confirming that my feelings for Marcus Chun extend beyond purely professional appreciation, Valeth replied with absolute composure. I'm also confirming that those feelings have never caused me to make decisions contrary to Zephyrian interests. Lord Vorthak leaned forward, sensing opportunity. But How can you be certain, Your Majesty? How can any of us be certain that personal attachment hasn't clouded your judgment regarding his recommendations? Because, Lord Vorthak, my personal attachment developed as a result of observing his character and capabilities, not despite them. My feelings didn't compromise my judgment. They were the result of sound judgment consistently validated by events. Marcus felt stunned by her bold strategy. Instead of denying or minimizing their relationship, she was claiming it as evidence of good judgment rather than compromised decision-making. Furthermore, Valeth continued, I find it interesting that this council questions my judgment now, after a series of successful initiatives, rather than celebrating the wisdom of choosing advisors based on merit rather than traditional credentials. Duke Kerrigan stood, his expression thoughtful. Your Majesty raises an important point. Advisor Chin's track record speaks for itself. Perhaps the question isn't whether your judgment has been influenced, but whether that influence has produced positive results. Exactly, Duke Kerrigan. I am not accountable to this council for my personal feelings. I am accountable for the effectiveness of my governance and the welfare of our people. By any objective measure, my administration has strengthened since Advisor Chin joined my staff. Duchess Zephine, one of the more traditional voices, spoke with careful formality. Your Majesty, while we cannot dispute the success of recent policies, we must consider the precedent being established. If personal relationships with foreign advisors become acceptable, what message does that send about Zephyrian values? It sends the message that we value competence over convention, effectiveness over tradition for its own sake, and wisdom over rigid adherence to outdated protocols. Valeth's voice carried conviction that filled the chamber. Our ancestors built this civilization by adapting to new challenges and embracing beneficial changes. Refusing to learn from other perspectives would dishonor their legacy, not preserve it. Marcus watched the faces around the chamber, trying to gauge reactions. Some nobles appeared thoughtful, considering Valeth's arguments. Others remained skeptical, their expressions suggesting predetermined opposition. The outcome was far from certain. Your Majesty, Lord Vorthak said, making one final attempt. Surely you understand our concern about setting precedents that could be exploited by future advisors with less noble intentions. I understand your concern, Lord Vorthak. I also understand that effective governance requires taking calculated risks and making difficult decisions. If you have evidence that Advisor Chun has acted inappropriately or recommended policies harmful to our interests, please present it. If not, then you're asking me to dismiss someone based on hypothetical future problems rather than actual performance. We're asking you to consider whether personal attachment has compromised your objectivity. And I'm telling you that personal attachment has enhanced my ability to recognize and appreciate exceptional service. Marcus Chun has exceeded every expectation I had when I appointed him. His recommendations have strengthened our security, his strategic thinking has protected our people, and his integrity has earned respect from military commanders who initially questioned his qualifications. Marcus felt a surge of emotion in her defense, but also growing worry about the political cost she was paying. Every word supporting him potentially weakened her position with traditionalist factions. Perhaps, Duke Kerrigan suggested diplomatically, we should hear from Advisor Chun himself regarding these matters. Valeth nodded toward Marcus, who rose on unsteady legs. This wasn't how he'd imagined addressing the noble council for the second time. Honored Council, he began. Queen Valeth has spoken truthfully about our relationship. I have developed deep personal respect and affection for her, both as a leader and as an individual. I won't pretend that those feelings don't influence my dedication to serving her administration effectively. He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. But I want to address the broader question Lord Vorthak has raised about foreign influence and divided loyalty. I've spent my entire adult life serving human interests in various capacities. When I accepted this position, I believed I was simply taking on a new job with better opportunities. Marcus looked directly at Valeth, drawing strength from her encouraging expression. What I discovered was something much more significant. I found a leader whose vision and principles aligned with my own deepest convictions about protecting innocent people and making decisions based on evidence rather than politics. I found a civilization that values wisdom and adaptation in ways that inspire genuine admiration. But surely, interjected Duchess Zephine, your ultimate loyalty remains with your own species. My ultimate loyalty is to principles that transcend species boundaries, Marcus replied firmly. Justice, protection of the innocent, honest governance, and the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. Queen Valeth embodies those principles better than any leader I've encountered, human or otherwise. Serving her administration isn't a betrayal of human values. It's the fullest expression of them. The chamber fell quiet as nobles absorbed his words. Marcus could see some of them reconsidering their positions, while others remained unconvinced. I understand your concerns about precedent, he continued. But precedent should be based on results, not fears. Judge me by what I've accomplished, not by theoretical risks of what I might do. Lord Vorthak stood for what Marcus sensed would be his final argument. Advisor Chun, your service record is indeed admirable. But the question remains whether any foreign advisor, regardless of competence, should have such significant influence over our sovereign. That question assumes influence is automatically problematic, Marcus replied. Every advisor influences the decisions of those they serve. The relevant question is whether that influence serves the interests of the people being governed. And you believe your influence has served Zephyrian interests. I believe the results speak for themselves. Reduced pirate activity, enhanced security protocols, and strategic innovations that have strengthened this realm's defensive capabilities. If those outcomes don't serve Zephyrian interests, then I fundamentally misunderstand what those interests are. Duke Kerrigan nodded approvingly. Well said, Advisor Chun. Lord Vorthak, unless you have evidence of actual wrongdoing rather than theoretical concerns, I suggest we focus on results rather than speculation. Marcus caught Valeth's eye and saw something that looked like hope mixed with determination. They weren't out of danger yet, but the tide of the debate seemed to be shifting. Very well, Lord Vorthak said with visible reluctance. I call for a formal vote of confidence in Her Majesty's appointment of Advisor Chun and the policies influenced by his recommendations. The vote would be by secret ballot, allowing nobles to vote their conscience without fear of immediate political retaliation. As the council prepared for the formal process, Marcus realized that his entire future hung in the balance of decisions being made by people he barely knew. Whatever happens, Valeth said quietly as they waited for the ballots to be distributed, I want you to know that I've never been prouder of anyone than I am of you right now. Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. And I've never been more grateful for someone's faith in me. That faith isn't misplaced, Marcus. Regardless of what this council decides, you've proven yourself beyond any doubt. As the voting began, Marcus watched each noble approach the ballot box with careful attention. Some voted quickly, their decisions apparently made long before today's proceedings. Others hesitated, weighing arguments they'd heard against their own convictions and political calculations. The count took 15 minutes that felt like hours. Marcus tried to read expressions and body language, but the nobles had perfected political masks over centuries of court intrigue. Finally, Duke Kerrigan announced the results. The motion of no confidence fails by a vote of 8-12, with 5 abstentions. Marcus felt his knees nearly give out with relief. They'd won, not by a comfortable margin, but decisively enough to settle the immediate question of his position. However, Duke Kerrigan continued, the council does recommend increased oversight of all strategic initiatives and regular reviews of advisor access to classified materials. It was a compromise that allowed the traditionalist faction to save face while preserving Marcus's role. Not a complete victory, but enough to continue their work together. As the council session adjourned, Marcus realized that their greatest test hadn't just been survived, but had actually strengthened their position. By confronting the questions about their relationship directly rather than hiding from them, Valeth had transformed a potential vulnerability into evidence of sound judgment and principled leadership. Well, Valeth said as they walked from the chamber, that was more dramatic than I'd anticipated. You could have warned me you were going to confirm our relationship publicly. Would it have changed anything? Marcus considered the question seriously. No, I suppose not. But it might have prepared me for the heart attack I nearly had when you said it. Valeth laughed, the first genuine expression of joy he'd seen from her in weeks. Sometimes the best defense is absolute honesty. They were going to discover the truth eventually. Better to control how and when rather than letting them expose it as a scandal. And now we get back to work. We've proven that our judgment is sound and our partnership effective. Time to build on that foundation. As they walked through the palace corridors toward their respective offices, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that first day when he'd stood guard during a royal visit. The shy human who had preferred routine and predictability was gone, replaced by someone willing to fight for principles and relationships that mattered more than safety. The proud queen had taken the greatest risk of all, staking her political future on the belief that excellence transcended conventional boundaries. Together, they'd faced the worst their critics could throw at them and emerged stronger. But Marcus suspected that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. Public acknowledgement of their relationship would bring new pressures and expectations. And somewhere in the galaxy, forces that had been watching Zephyria Prime's growing strength would soon make their own moves. For now, though, it was enough to know that they would face whatever came next as partners in every sense of the word. 6 months after the council vote, Marcus stood in the palace's war room, studying intelligence reports that made his blood run cold. The hegemony of Keth, a militant empire that had been expanding aggressively through the outer sectors, had begun massing fleets near Zephyrian space. What made the situation particularly ominous was that the Keth had never shown interest in this region before. "How many ships are we looking at?" Valeth asked, joining him at the holographic display that showed fleet positions across a dozen star systems. "Conservative estimate? 300 capital ships, plus support vessels. They're calling it training exercises, but the deployment patterns suggest preparation for coordinated assault." Fleet Commander Zefak, now one of Marcus's closest collaborators despite initial skepticism about the human advisor, pointed to several key positions on the display. "They've positioned themselves to cut off our major trade routes and isolate us from potential allies. This isn't random positioning." Marcus nodded grimly. "They're also timing this perfectly. Our anti-piracy operations were so successful that we've reduced our own fleet strength in outlying areas. We assumed the security situation had stabilized. Have we received any communication from the Keth regarding their intentions?" Valeth asked. "That's where things get interesting," Marcus replied, calling up a new display. 3 days ago, they transmitted a formal diplomatic message requesting a meeting to discuss mutual security concerns and regional stability. They want to send an envoy to negotiate. Negotiate what? That's the question. The message was deliberately vague, but, reading between the lines, they seem to be suggesting that Zephyria Prime's recent military innovations pose a threat to regional balance. Fleet Commander Zefak's expression hardened. "They're concerned about our defensive capabilities?" That sounds like preparation for justifying aggression. Marcus had reached the same conclusion. The Keth Empire operated on principles of dominance and expansion. They viewed any strengthening of potential targets as a threat to their own interests. "What do we know about their military capabilities?" Valeth asked. "Significant," Marcus admitted. "The Keth favor overwhelming force over tactical subtlety. Their ships are heavily armed, and their crews are well-trained. In a direct confrontation, they could probably take our system, though at considerable cost. But you don't think they want a direct confrontation. I think they want us to surrender without a fight. The diplomatic request is probably an ultimatum disguised as negotiation. Submit to Keth authority or face invasion." Valeth was quiet for a long moment, studying the tactical displays with the same intensity she'd once brought to historical artifacts in the palace archives. Marcus could see her weighing options and calculating consequences. "What would you recommend?" she asked finally. The question carried weight beyond its simple phrasing. 6 months ago, Marcus might have suggested defensive measures and hope for the best. Now, understanding both Zephyrian capabilities and the broader political implications, his thinking had evolved significantly. "I recommend we accept their request for negotiations, but on our terms. Invite their envoy here, where we control the environment and can demonstrate our strength rather than appearing vulnerable. Use the meeting to gather intelligence about their true intentions while buying time to prepare our defenses. And if they refuse to negotiate on our terms, then we have our answer about their real intentions, and we prepare for war." Fleet Commander Zefak leaned forward, his expression grave. "Advisor Chun, if it comes to war, can we win?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "In a traditional fleet engagement? Probably not. They have superior numbers and firepower. But we have advantages they don't expect, such as, we know our own system better than they do. We have defensive installations they're not aware of. And we've developed tactical approaches that they won't anticipate because they're based on human strategic thinking adapted to Zephyrian capabilities. You're talking about asymmetric warfare, Valeth said, understanding immediately. Exactly. Make them fight our kind of war instead of theirs. Use mobility and intelligence to offset their numerical superiority. Force them to operate in environments where their advantages are minimized. Over the following days, preparations intensified throughout Zephyria Prime. The palace became a constant hub of military planning as commanders worked to implement defensive strategies that combine traditional Zephyrian strengths with innovative human tactical concepts. Marcus found himself working 18-hour days, coordinating with fleet commanders, intelligence analysts, and diplomatic staff to prepare for every possible scenario. The weight of responsibility was unlike anything he'd experienced, but it was balanced by absolute confidence in the team they'd built together. You realize, Valeth said during one of their brief, private moments, that this is exactly the kind of test your critics feared. A foreign advisor in a position to influence critical decisions during a military crisis. Are you having second thoughts? About trusting your judgment? Never. About the political implications if things go badly? Constantly. Marcus understood her concern. If the Keth situation ended badly, blame would inevitably fall on the human advisor who had recommended their response strategy. But dwelling on potential consequences wouldn't help them navigate current challenges. All we can do is make the best decisions possible with available information, he said. Everything else is beyond our control. The Keth envoy arrived 3 days later aboard a massive dreadnought that positioned itself at the edge of Zephyrian space like a not-so-subtle threat. Ambassador Vrex was everything Marcus had expected from Keth diplomatic reports, arrogant, condescending, and convinced of his species' inherent superiority. Queen Valeth, Vrex said during their first formal meeting, his tone suggesting he was addressing a subordinate rather than a sovereign. The hegemony of Keth has noted with concern your recent military activities and their potential impact on regional stability. Ambassador Vrex, Valeth replied with perfect diplomatic courtesy. Zephyria Prime's defensive measures are exactly that defensive. We pose no threat to peaceful neighbors. Perhaps, but your recent tactical innovations, particularly those developed by your foreign advisor, represent capabilities that could destabilize the entire sector if they were to be used aggressively. Marcus felt every eye in the room turned toward him. This was the moment he'd anticipated the conversation they were really here to have. Ambassador, Marcus said, standing to address Vrex directly, are you suggesting that effective defense somehow threatens regional peace? Vrex's expression showed barely concealed contempt. I'm suggesting that when primitive species began adopting advanced military concepts beyond their traditional capabilities, it creates unpredictable variables that more established powers must address. And how does the hegemony propose to address these variables? Through integration into a larger framework of regional security. Zephyria Prime would maintain internal autonomy while accepting Keth guidance on military and foreign policy matters. There it was. The ultimatum disguised as a diplomatic solution. Submit to Keth authority or face the consequences. Valeth maintained perfect composure, but Marcus could see the anger building beneath her diplomatic mask. Ambassador Vrex, are you proposing that Zephyria Prime surrender its sovereignty in exchange for Keth protection? I'm proposing a mutually beneficial arrangement that ensures regional stability and protects all parties from unnecessary conflict. And if we decline this generous offer, Vrex's smile was cold and predatory. Then, the hegemony would be forced to consider more direct measures to address security concerns in this sector. The threat was clear, but Marcus noticed something interesting about its delivery. Vrex was confident, but not completely certain. He expected Zephyria Prime to capitulate, but he wasn't entirely sure they would. Ambassador, Marcus interjected, perhaps you could clarify what specific actions by Zephyria Prime have created these security concerns? Your anti-piracy operations demonstrated tactical capabilities that exceed traditional Zephyrian military doctrine. Your integration of foreign strategic concepts suggests external influence over your defensive planning. These factors create uncertainty about your true intentions. So our success in protecting our own people is somehow threatening to the hegemony. Your methods are concerning. The source of your innovations raises questions about broader human involvement in this sector. Marcus felt pieces clicking into place. This wasn't just about Zephyria Prime's defensive capabilities. The Keth were worried about human strategic influence spreading to other species in the region. I see, Marcus said carefully. So this is really about preventing human tactical concepts from being adopted by other civilizations. This is about maintaining stability and preventing the spread of destabilizing influences. Valeth stood, her full height emphasizing her natural authority. Ambassador Vrex, I believe you've made your position clear. We'll need time to consider the hegemony's proposal. Of course, Your Majesty. But I should mention that our fleet exercises will continue during your deliberations. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings about the scope of Keth capabilities in this region. After Vrex departed, the palace war room erupted in tense discussion. Military commanders argued about defensive options, while diplomatic staff analyzed the political implications of various responses. They're more worried than they're letting on, Marcus observed during a strategy session that evening. If they were completely confident, Vrex wouldn't have bothered with threats. He'd have simply demanded surrender. What do you think is driving their concern? Fleet Commander Zefak asked. Fear that our success will inspire other species to reject Keth dominance. If human strategic concepts can help Zephyria Prime resist their pressure, what happens when other civilizations start adopting similar approaches? Valeth nodded thoughtfully. So we're not just fighting for our own independence. We're potentially fighting for the independence of every species in this sector, which gives us potential allies if we can convince them that resistance is possible. Over the next week, Marcus worked frantically to develop a comprehensive defense strategy, while Valeth used diplomatic channels to gauge support from neighboring systems. What they discovered was encouraging. Several civilizations had grown tired of Keth intimidation and were willing to provide covert assistance if Zephyria Prime could demonstrate effective resistance. The Altarian Confederation has offered to share intelligence about Keth fleet movements, Valeth reported during one planning session. The Nexus Collective is willing to provide advanced sensor technology. They're not ready to fight openly, but they're hoping we can prove that the Keth aren't invincible. That's more support than I expected, Marcus admitted. But it also means we can't afford to lose. If we fall, it sends a message that resistance is futile. No pressure at all, Fleet Commander Zefak said dryly. The final confrontation came sooner than expected. Ambassador Vrex returned 3 days before his stated deadline, accompanied by a significant military escort. Queen Valeth, he announced without diplomatic preamble, the hegemony requires your response to our security proposal. Ambassador Vrex, Valeth replied with calm authority. Zephyria Prime respectfully declines to surrender its sovereignty under any circumstances. Vrex's expression shifted from diplomatic courtesy to cold hostility. Then, you choose conflict over cooperation. The consequences will be entirely your responsibility. The consequences will be shared by anyone who attempts to conquer free peoples, Marcus interjected. And I suspect those consequences will be more severe than the hegemony anticipates. You speak boldly for someone whose species has no stake in this sector, human. My species has a stake in freedom wherever it's threatened. And my personal stake is in protecting people I care about from those who would dominate them. Vrex turned back to Valeth with barely concealed fury. You allow this alien to speak for Zephyrian interests? I allow my trusted advisor to speak for principles we share, Valeth replied firmly. Principles that apparently differ significantly from those of the hegemony. Very well. When your cities burn and your people suffer, remember that you chose this path. As Vrex departed, Marcus felt the weight of history settling around them. They'd committed Zephyria Prime to a war against superior forces based on faith in untested strategies and uncertain allies. Any regrets? Valeth asked as they watched the Keth ships position themselves for assault. Marcus looked at the woman who had transformed his understanding of himself and his capabilities, who had shown him that sometimes the greatest risk was not taking any risks at all. None, he said simply. Whatever happens, we'll face it together. The Battle of Zephyria Prime began 18 hours later with a coordinated assault that stretched the planet's defenses to their limits. But as Keth forces discovered the hard way, the shy human guard and the proud alien queen had built